Look, I know the title comes off as inflammatory clickbait, but while the accusation is pretty fair, it does come from a place of sincerity, and I think I can back it up. I'm not here just to convince you that this movie is bad. That's a little basic for my tastes. I want to explore the reasons why it's bad, what went wrong, and what doesn't work about it. If Five Nights at Freddy's was just a bad movie, I wouldn't care that much about it. But I believe that it is bad in very interesting ways and for very interesting reasons. That being said, before I launch into my tirade about everything the FNaF movie does wrong and why I really do not like it, I want to defend it from some criticisms that I see as less legitimate or at the very least as less valuable. I want to make it clear that none of these are the driving force behind why I don't like the movie. Part 1. Defending Five Nights at Freddy's. There's a chunk of reasons that people don't like the Five Nights franchise that are entirely unrelated to actually playing any of the games or watching the movie. First is the oversaturation. When it came out, FNaF was a breakout hit that spread like wildfire, and the hype surrounding it, while it has changed and stabilized to some degree, has never really died down. Now it is a popular mainstream IP and it's easy to feel inundated by it. Over the past decade, they have released a dozen games, upwards of 30 books, graphic novels, a movie, a novelization of the movie, coloring books, plushies, board games, and so much more. If you didn't jump on the FNaF train, then it can be annoying to constantly have all of this pop up on your feed, especially when it has such a rabid fan base. Which brings me to the next point. It's not going to shock anyone to hear that FNaF appeals to a very young audience. That isn't to say that only kids enjoy the franchise, plenty of adults do too, including those who were kids when it all started. But the younger members of the fandom also tend to be the loudest, most obnoxious, and most irritating. Having young, loud fans almost always creates a significant amount of backlash. It happened with Five Nights at Freddy's, Fortnite, and even to Minecraft. Another ingredient of the fandom that can turn a lot of people off is influencer culture. When many people think of Five Nights at Freddy's, they immediately think of overdramatic screams from any number of gaming YouTubers or streamers. Influencers already have a pretty bad reputation, at least conceptually. The very notion of an influencer just emphasizes that they are trying to sell you something. It feels so inauthentic, and that makes their reactions and their content even more grating. It's easy for people to get annoyed by that and naturally assume that a bad salesman means a bad product. For what it's worth, none of these reasons apply to me. While I can share some of the same frustrations as the people making these critiques, I try not to let the opinions of 8-year-olds dictate my taste in content. And I'm not saying these aren't understandable reasons not to like FNaF or any other piece of media for that matter. A genuine part of enjoying certain kinds of media for a lot of people is publicly engaging with said media and or auxiliary content. Obnoxious fan bases can make hostile or uncomfortable environments where you don't want to do that, and can also make it embarrassing to be associated with as a fan. There's another category of reasons that I think hold a bit more weight, but that I'm able to overlook. These have to do with people not liking the games because they have a bunch of lazy jump scares, contrived and stupid lore, that they feel like repetitive cash grabs, and anything to do with the creator and certain political donations they've made in the past. I understand these arguments, but they didn't have a lot of bearing on me when I watched the FNaF movie. All of this is to say that while I'm not particularly a fan of FNaF, I'm not a blind hater either. I went into watching the movie with an open mind, which I think actually puts me in the perfect position to review this movie. After all, one of the biggest goals for a movie like this is to bring the franchise to a broader general audience.
What we finally figured out is that we should make a movie that works for the fans. If anyone else comes, that's great, but not try and please them too.
Maybe some of these other projects from the, straight out the gate, we're hoping to really land with a general audience in a bigger way. If we happen to do that, it'll be amazing. But, we really did want to make the movie for the fans.
We are only making this for fans of Five Nights at Freddy's. Only.
Okay, I get it. Maybe the reason I didn't like the movie was just because I wasn't a fan. I can hear the inevitable torrents of comments flooding in. Maybe all of my criticism would be irrelevant or completely reversed if I was more familiar with the games and the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. That's fine. I'm willing to do the legwork. If that's what it takes to be taken seriously, I'll go down this rabbit hole. And that, I did, ladies and gentlemen. I played the games, which is to say I wasn't having a lot of fun and decided they weren't really my tempo. But then I watched hours upon hours of Markiplier Let's Plays and game theory explanations and a review of every single book. I learned the difference between Fredbear and Ned Bear and Glamrock Freddy and Golden Freddy and Toy Freddy and Shadow Freddy and Funtime Freddy and Lefty, who was a little freak doing his own thing. I learned the difference between the bite of 87 and the bite of 83. Now I know all about how much of a petty bitch Willie Afton really is. And after all of that, I rewatched the FNaF movie and nothing changed. I mean, besides a few basic conceptual points, they change up the lore in some pretty significant but also confusing ways. And in a different interview, Emma Tommy did emphasize that they were, in fact, interested in reaching a wider audience. But, I did spend a lot of time researching the lore, so indulge me for just 20 seconds to say my piece, so that I don't feel like I completely wasted my time. I knew the lore was complicated, but I didn't know that it was just so contrived. I also kind of assumed that maybe one of the reasons the movie took so long and was so bad was because it was being crushed under the weight of all the lore that had been created. But as I learned, that was way off base. The lore has interesting moments shoddily stitched together with scotch tape and fan speculations. The only time when it was almost neat and cohesive was Dream Theory, don't at me. I guess I now understand why a wise man once said, "Lore can become so dense that there isn't room for a story anymore." That man was Scott Cawthon in 2015. But there was one other takeaway from my experience immersing myself into the world of FNaF. While I wasn't a huge fan of most of the gameplay and mechanics of it all, there's one thing that it gets right very consistently, and that is the vibes. The atmosphere and visuals of the game are pretty consistently strong. Even in the early days when there was some jank to it, there was also a lot of charm, and it captured the desired mood perfectly. And the concept? Oh man, Scott Cawthon wasn't the first guy to come up with spooky animatronics or to think that these Chuck E. Cheese mascots were uncanny, but he was the first to capitalize on that public perception in a unique way through a horror game. The concept so perfectly weaponizes nostalgia, and the animatronics are a great tool for the uncanny, a fantastic blend between mannequin and monster. And I love how simple but effective the threat is of them seeing you as a naked endoskeleton, so they want to forcibly shove you into a suit. I know that that's not a lore-accurate reason anymore, but I thought it was great. So with Five Nights at Freddy's, Scott Cawthon hit gold with such an amazing concept, and he was able to follow through with the hype by releasing game after game after game in rapid succession. I think there's a lot to admire there, and I'm in no way surprised by the success of this franchise. Of course, if you're still questioning my credentials as a non-fan, then I'd recommend Quimble's video on the FNaF movie. They are another small creator and a lifelong fan of the franchise who enjoyed the movie but still had some critiques and analysis that I think are worthwhile and interesting. Open up their video in another tab and watch it when you're done here. I'd highly recommend it. But I think that's enough of singing its praises and defending it from certain critiques. Hopefully by now you can see that I tried to give this movie a fair shake. Let's finally talk about the movie, beginning with the plot. Part 2. The plot is bad. We open up with your standard horror prologue with a nameless security guard having a rough time with the animatronics. He tries to escape but is caught and wakes up trapped and with a razor animatronic mask coming towards his face. I'll be honest, I don't think that this Saw-like trap makes much sense if you think about it, nor do I think it's better than the simple brutality of shoving him into an animatronic. But this scene at least establishes a spooky tone and threat level, so I'll try not to nitpick too much this early. We get a really good intro credit sequence that both shows off the pizzeria and has these nice 8-bit exposition moments. It's a nice tie-in to the game, and if anything, I'd like to have seen more of this. After that, we get introduced to our main character, Mike. Mike is a mall cop trying to take care of his little sister Abby because their parents are no longer in the picture. At his job, he thinks a kid is getting abducted, which immediately triggers his trauma, so with reckless disregard, he goes and valiantly saves the kid from the kid's father. Mike really beats the shit out of the dad, so very early on, we know that Mike has some unresolved trauma, and his trauma response is quick and violent. It's weird that this is our first impression of Mike, because being blinded by rage and turning to violence is something that literally never happens again. After his little whoopsie, he loses his job and his prospects aren't looking great. When he goes home, Mike goes to sleep and we're transported to our first Nebraska sequence. So here's the deal. When they were young and camping in Nebraska with their family, Mike's brother was kidnapped out of nowhere. Mike has lived with this trauma ever since and believes that he might be able to learn more about what happened and solve the mystery if he just dreams this dream enough times. There's a lot of convoluted and bad psychology to explain how maybe you never really forget anything. And maybe you could have the exact same dream if you always listen to this tape and take these pills and look at this poster.
There's this theory that we can't forget things.
I think you saw who took him.
I know I did. So every night I dream, and I go back to that same memory, and I search for details, for any little thing that got overlooked.
This is why Mike can't work nights, because he needs to fall asleep at the same time every night, I guess. Otherwise, he has no hope of dreaming the same Nebraska dream and saving his long-lost brother. Also, out of all the places you could choose, why Nebraska? Some offense intended to any Nebraskan viewers, but Nebraska is easily one of the most boring states in the nation. And that's not just flippant opinion, no, this is objective fact. According to one analysis that I am deeming extremely credible because it supports my argument, Nebraska was found to be the third most boring state, only behind Idaho and South Dakota. I'm sorry, just a little outburst. This scene only lasts a minute or so and then it's over. That's fine. I can handle one bland exposition dump dream sequence in Nebraska. The next day, we learn that Mike and Abby's Aunt Jane wants custody over Abby. She doesn't think Mike is a good parental figure due to the, trauma-induced attacking of a man at the mall and struggles to keep a job. Aunt Jane also thinks that it is absolutely astonishing that Abby draws a lot and has imaginary friends.
Oh, right. Perfectly normal to sit around drawing pictures all day and talking to magical creatures who do not exist.
Weird arguments to make, but I guess that's why she's the antagonist. Mike thinks the only reason his aunt wants custody over Abby is to get welfare money from the state. And yet again, this makes absolutely no sense for a motive, but it's the only one ever proposed. By all accounts, Aunt Jane is well off already. We'll see the kind of shit she spends her money on later in the movie. And how much do you think you're going to be getting from the state? Kids are expensive. You're not going to be raking it in and making a glorious profit by taking in your niece. Anyway, this lights a fire under Mike's ass and he calls the recruiter back to accept the night shift security job he was offered. And then, finally, 20 minutes that felt like more into the movie, we get to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. A bit of a slow start, but that's fine because now it's where it really begins. Mike plays a neat company VHS, looks around the pizzeria in the dark, looks briefly at the animatronics, and then falls asleep. Oh, I'm sorry, did you want to see more of this cool set? Maybe check out the arcade or have a subtle spooky moment on one of the monitors? Well, fuck you, bitches, we're going to Nebraska again. This time, there's a handful of strange kids around who won't answer Mike's questions. He wakes up and that's the first night at Freddy's. Forgive me for feeling a little underwhelmed. He goes home and we cut to the diner with Aunt Jane. Apparently, the aunt paid the babysitter $200 to find evidence of child endangerment, but all she found was that Abby was nice and Mike slept a lot. That, honestly, is such a great summary of their characters. Well, they still need to do something about this custody battle, so one idea that's floated by the group is straight up killing Mike, which the aunt seems willing to consider. This off-brand Cruella de Vil is willing to pay to assassinate her nephew so that she can get a monthly welfare check? A new idea suggested that the babysitter, her brother, and their friends will mess up the pizzeria so that Mike loses his job and thus looks unfit for custody. Also, this is Doug, and he's the best part of this movie. Night 2 at Freddy's. First night, I was a little disappointed that mostly all he did was sleep instead of, showing off what we all came to see. But I get it, you want to build up a little anticipation. You don't want to waste all the cool stuff night 1. So when he gets to Freddy's on night 2, he immediately falls asleep again. Bam! Another goddamn Nebraska dream sequence. This time, this kid is a little freak. Just look at him. When Mike wakes up, ooh, spooky lights. An officer is at the front door. She introduces herself as Vanessa and seems to be very familiar with Freddy Fazbear's. She also alludes to children that went missing here. Ooh, spooky. The next day, the babysitter and other goons go to Freddy's and start destroying everything and making a big ol' mess. No day shift security, I guess. We finally get to see some violence from the animatronics who pick off the goons one by one. This cupcake, weirdly, is going to get most of the violent action in this movie, which seems like a strange choice. I don't know, I guess I just find it to be more of an accessory than anything else? Is there a child in the spirit of the cupcake? Isn't this just a prop of Chica's? I thought maybe the other animatronics would be shown off a bit more. I don't know. But we finally get some animatronic murdering, so I'll take it. Back home, we get a lot of drama between Mike and Abby and Vanessa. Abby's worried Mike wants to give her up, which causes Mike to give one of his only smiles and laughs in the entire movie.
It's not funny.
It's a very weird time for that, bud. Mike and Vanessa also have a nice touching exposition dump. If somehow you were confused by the absolute subtlety of the Nebraska dream sequences, Mike will spell it all out for you in this scene.
So I used to have a brother.
Your brother.
And I never found my brother.
Because the babysitter was eaten by Freddy, Mike has to take Abby to work that night. He puts Abby to sleep and cleans up the damage. I guess because Abby's here, he's finally gonna have to stay awake. Perfect opportunity to ramp up the tension and the scares. Nope, he's already asleep. Abby wakes up and hangs out with ghost children. Meanwhile, we're on a one-way trip to, that's right, Nebraska. Mike talks to the kid in charge and asks for help, but the kid will only do that for an exchange of some kind. I genuinely don't know why Mike thinks these kids that suddenly appeared in his dream are helpful in regards to finding out more about his brother. Like, he doesn't know that they are the spirits of the dead kids in the animatronics. And even if he did know that, he would have no reason to believe they have privileged information about his brother. Anyway, Mike wakes up to Abby screaming and in a panic rushes to the main room to see her surrounded by the animatronics. Oh no, is she in danger? Nah, they were just tickling her. When Mike and Abby go home and talk about what happened, they're surprisingly nonchalant and matter-of-fact about it. It's just not that big of a deal, I suppose.
Are they...
Ghosts?
Yeah.
Of course. How else could they make the robot to move?
That night, Mike and Abby go to Freddy's, and Abby is very friendly with the animatronics. Vanessa is there too, and she knew about the animatronics the whole time. Abby proposes building a fort, but Mike wants to establish some ground rules. You want to make sure your little sister is safe after all. Vanessa, on the other hand, interrupts Mike and is gung-ho about the fort plan. Fuck your rules. They have a fort building montage, but a little bit later, Abby shocks herself on Bonnie's guitar. It's kind of a weird moment. They need to put Abby in danger, but with how they're portraying the animatronics, they couldn't have any intentional threat. So she gets shocked on the guitar somehow, I guess. As they're leaving, Vanessa, who stopped Mike from establishing rules and pushed the animatronic hangout further, threatens to shoot Mike if he ever brings Abby there again. What the fuck are you talking about? Vanessa's character motivation is nonsensical and wildly inconsistent. It's such a sudden 180 that does not in any way feel justified. Now that he can't bring Abby to Freddy's without getting shot, Mike needs a new babysitter for her. So the person he calls, and it's somewhat baffling to me, is Aunt Jane. And now I am officially confused about her character. She has been presented as this cartoonishly villainous gold digger who is willing to consider ruining her nephew's life, or maybe even killing him, just so she can get a paycheck. But Mike apparently knows that he can trust and rely on her to show up on short notice and take care of Abby. So which is it? Is Aunt Jane this vile monster, or is she just that relative that you aren't a huge fan of, but at the end of the day is family? Either interpretation makes certain moments of this movie, important moments, make absolutely no sense. So I don't really care about which is the correct interpretation, if there even is one, because in either case, I think it fucks up the plot. That night, Mike goes to Freddy's, and you already know what he's going to do the moment he walks through the door. Goodbye, really cool pizzeria. Hello, Sleepy Nebraska. This time, his dream flashback is different. His brother isn't kidnapped, and his family is just kind of vibing instead. The ghost kids tell him he can have this dream every night if he gives them Abby. This also doesn't make a lot of sense. I thought Mike's goal with everything he was doing wasn't to change his nightmares into happy dreams, but was to delve into his unconscious through these dreams to find something more. Also, are good dreams really that important for him? More important than his relationship with his sister, which we have been led to believe is the most important relationship in his life right now. Apparently so, because Mike takes that deal and sells his sister to the animatronic children. He tries to renege on the deal, but no takebacksies is the law of the land in Nebraska. He wakes up to the razor mask saw trap, but gets out of it immediately. He tries to leave through the exit door, which is the third time this exact moment has happened in the movie. But it's locked and he gets rushed by Foxy. Back at home, Golden Freddy kills Aunt Jane and brings Abby back to the pizzeria. They take a taxi back, implying that Golden Freddy had to physically walk or drive to this house in the first place without attracting attention. Mike wakes up having been bandaged up by Vanessa at a police supply outpost. They have a conversation and Vanessa gives an exposition dump about William Afton and how he killed the ghostly animatronic kids. Oh, and also,
He's my father.
okay. At one point, while Mike is upset at her for knowing all of this, and in another plot twist, knowing that her father was the one that kidnapped Mike's brother, Vanessa says,
I tried to warn you. I really did try, in my own way.
this might be the worst line in the whole movie, because she categorically did not try to help. Not in any way. I feel like the writers just recognized they created a pretty fucked up character, but wanted her to be more heroic and sympathetic, so they're just trying to gaslight us here. They stock up on cattle prods and tasers, which can short-circuit the animatronics, and head to Freddy's. At Freddy's, we get a confrontation between everyone. Eventually, the yellow rabbit we've been hearing about shows up, and it's none other than Steve Raglan, the career counselor. He was William Afton all along. I think this twist reveal is kind of shit, but I do like the idea of Shaggy unmasking the monster, but the monster was Shaggy all along. I also don't really know why Afton is in an animatronic suit. You'd think it would be because he can use the mechanical power to crush the protagonists, but he's just planning on stabbing them with a kitchen knife. And it's not as a disguise, he immediately unmasks himself. There's some back and forth that leads to Vanessa getting stabbed before Abby convinces or reminds the animatronics that Afton killed them by drawing a picture. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it, it's more loosely vibes-based. The animatronics turn on him, but only the cupcake attacks. Afton says that he always comes back, which is an iconic line from the franchise, but makes absolutely no sense here when we haven't seen him come back ever. Everyone lives happily ever after, but oh no, Afton is still alive. End movie. Okay, so it's clear that there are some problems with this film, but I want to delve deeper into why it doesn't work. Part 3. The horror is bad. Five Nights at Freddy's is at its core a horror franchise. This was marketed as a horror movie. It sets the tone through its horror-coded opening scene, which is why it's so disappointing that this movie is a terrible horror movie and not scary at all. One contributing factor to this is the PG-13 rating. There was a lot of concern when it was announced that this movie would be PG-13, but a lot of people rightly pointed out that this wasn't necessarily a death sentence. A lot of PG-13 horror can still be frightening and well-liked, such as The Ring, A Quiet Place, or Drag Me to Hell. And the director Emma Tommy tried to assuage these fears by stating, "We were trying to push it as far as we could while still retaining that PG-13 rating." Sadly, this statement is just not true. I don't think anyone is going to watch the FNaF movie and think it was pushing the envelope or be surprised what they were able to get away with. It is exceptionally tame. Look at the difference in how Afton dies in both the games and the movie. Somehow, even though it has Atari graphics, the games feel so much more visceral and violent than the movie. And this is one of the more intense kills of the movie. But kills aren't the only ingredient to good horror, far from. Two of the most important ingredients are suspense and tension, which would have been exceptionally easy to cultivate in the pizzeria. Have things subtly shift around, have moments where you don't know where a certain animatronic is, show something on the security monitor that the audience sees, But Mike doesn't. Instead, the movie keeps things extremely on rails and in your face so that you never have to worry or wonder about what will happen next. It's always brutally obvious. One ingredient of horror that should have been a slam dunk is the uncanny. I mentioned before how the setting and the animatronics are perfect for this. Creepy, not quite animate monstrosities which have their horror enhanced by their child-friendly demeanor and nostalgic setting. Oh, it's perfect! But the animatronics in the movie aren't scary. They feel too human and less like unfeeling robots in their physicality. The stunt actors who control them do a good job, don't get me wrong, but this is very difficult to get right. Even worse, the animatronics have absolutely no personality. All of them walk the same, have similar mannerisms, all of them are slow and clunky in the same way, so that they feel interchangeable. That's not compelling, and subsequently, it's not scary. Finally, they really feel like it's necessary to emphasize that these are just innocent kids. They will get violent, sure, but only if you threaten them and did something wrong, or for more confusing and nebulous reasons we'll talk about in the next section. The point is, it's harder to feel worried about our protagonists when we're very confident that the animatronics are only a meaningful threat to evil fodder characters. And one last element that contributes to this being a bad horror movie is the jump scares. I don't hate jump scares in and of themselves. They have their place and can be done in quite a successful way that adds to the tension and mood. FNaF, unfortunately, has the worst kinds of jump scares. They're nonsensical, don't add anything, they're not even scary. Take the Balloon Boy scares. Okay, maybe it's nice to see a popular character from the franchise, I guess, but what is this jump scare supposed to be? Mike opens his locker and sees a figurine? What about that is startling? I'm genuinely confused on what's supposed to be happening here. It feels cheap and vacuous, which is a good description of the horror of this movie as a whole. Part 4. The mystery is bad. But maybe I got it all wrong. Sure, at first glance, the Five Nights franchise looks like horror, and the same goes for the movie. But at its heart, this franchise is really a mystery. Think about it. Scott Cawthon absolutely loves to give the lore piecemeal, often with little puzzles to be solved and riddles to be unraveled. Is it any surprise that it has such a symbiotic relationship with game theory? On the surface, Five Nights at Freddy's may look like a horror, but in actuality, it's a mystery franchise through and through. Why would I expect anything else from the movie? And for the movie, there are two main mysteries driving the narrative throughout. First, the mystery underlying Mike's whole character, what really happened to his brother Garrett. Why was he kidnapped? Who is responsible? Is it possible to save him? And why did this take place in Nebraska of all places? But although this is such an important mystery to the movie, it isn't handled like one. While Mike tries to go into his dreams to find answers, that isn't actually where he finds nearly anything out. And out of all those questions I asked, only one of them is given a meaningful answer, and that is who did it. This question isn't solved by finding clues and putting them together to make sense of everything. It is solved rather abruptly in the climax when we learn it was William Afton who kidnapped and killed Garrett. There's some light foreshadowing about this that doesn't quite stand up to scrutiny when Afton recognizes Mike's last name. Apparently Schmidt is pretty obscure, but that's really all we get. It's not a mystery, it's a single question that leads to a single answer without much in between. What about the second mystery then? Maybe this one will be handled a bit better. This is the mystery of the kids that went missing at Freddy Fazbear's. Technically speaking, this one has a more gradual unveiling and I guess could be called an actual mystery unlike the last one. But most of the information surrounding this mystery comes through exposition dumps, usually through Vanessa. I guess you may find the kids in Nebraska sufficiently mysterious and wonder why this one is completely orange and has a hook for a hand. Wait a minute, is that Foxy? Look, there's just not a lot of subtlety or intrigue being employed here. There aren't clues gradually provided that ultimately lead to a great revelation. It's just non-stop exposition where the characters tell you exactly what's going on in the most blatant way possible. It would have been so easy to make it better too. Maybe Mike watches some more corporate VHS tapes with disturbing implications. Or he finds strange details or anomalies in the pizzeria. Maybe have Abby bring Mike a weird drawing from the walls, or he catches discrepancies in Vanessa's story. There's so many options to craft a compelling mystery, but they didn't really do any of that. So I think both of the mysteries of this movie fail pretty dramatically. Part 5. The comedy is bad. Come on now, do I really expect a movie with such an absurd premise to be anything more than a comedy? This is the franchise that brought you Mr. Hugs, for God's sake. Clearly it isn't something to be taken seriously. And other movies which we'll say were inspired by FNaF understand this perfectly well. Look how campy and over the top the Banana Splits movie is. I can critique this movie for not being a terrifying horror or cerebral mystery, but it was never meant to be those things. At the end of the day, it's a spooky, silly, lighthearted adventure. Let me start by saying I can understand this perspective, somewhat. There are elements of Five Nights at Freddy's that are clearly going for humor, and at least one succeeds. Doug is a bastion of light in the darkness. I love everything about him, from his mannerisms, facial expressions, the way he delivers his lines.
I just realized I shouldn't be hearing any of this. As a matter of fact, I shouldn't be here at all.
Sit down, Doug.
Doug is fantastic, and I won't accept a negative word about him. At the same time, Doug feels like he's in a completely different movie than our main characters. This is actually a larger problem with the movie as a whole. Some of the side characters like Doug and Aunt Jane, or even the cameos of Matt Pat and Corey X Kenshin, feel over the top, unrealistic, like they're in a campy comedy or B-horror movie. But if you look at Mike, Abby, or Vanessa, you don't get that vibe at all. They are trying to take this very seriously. While it's possible to perfectly blend these disparate ingredients together, with the FNaF movie it just feels like two separate scripts with different characters stapled together. Here's my big issue with calling this a comedy. This movie is so devoid of life, vibrancy, and enthusiasm through most of its runtime. Through the interviews, it's clear that Emma Tommy wanted to take a grounded approach and avoid making it too campy and silly.
I think there's something so inherently humorous about the animatronics, and embracing that is like the best part about it, you know? But we didn't want to go full camp either.
I think even in the moments where it goes into supernatural places and wild scenarios, they really kept the characters very grounded. And I feel like the realism they brought to the performances just helped blend those two things seamlessly.
It was incredible. She delivered this sense of realism to it that I think in less capable hands would have been lost. And I think within that, you would have made a campy film. I think there's something that makes this film feel grounded.
This can be seen most of all through Josh Hutcherson's portrayal of Mike. Every moment he's on screen, his character is just so boring to me.
You know, it's such a wild world, FNaF, and Josh brought this really grounded approach to the character of Mike.
I mean, Josh is like such an authentic performer, and I think he really looks to find the truth in every character and every situation. And the fact that he embodied the role of Mike in such a grounded way, I think really helps us as the audience like traverse this wild, crazy world.
Boy, do they love to emphasize just how grounded everything is. I guess he's accurately playing someone who's stressed, sleepy, and has underlying trauma, but when that's all you bring to the role, yikes. How am I supposed to care about the protagonist of this movie if he doesn't seem to care? In a panel, Emma Tommy said,
This movie hangs on him, and we knew that the character Mike was gonna be make or break for this film.
Maybe that's true, and maybe that's why it all falls apart for me. This is a genuine question because I haven't seen a lot of his other stuff. Is Josh Hutcherson a good actor? Most of the reviews talking about him in this movie are memeing about how hot he is, and that just isn't helpful. And it's not just Josh. I've already talked about how the animatronics are slow and clunky and devoid of personality. These animatronics don't get a bit quirky at all. Back to the comedy, occasionally one of the characters will say a line that's supposed to add some humor to the situation, some levity, but it's so apathetically or awkwardly delivered that I can't imagine people getting a lot out of it.
And you only have to worry about one thing, keeping people out. And keep the place tidy.
That's two things.
You had one job, one. Keep him in the dark and kill him if he got too close.
That's two jobs.
I guess another moment that's kind of played for laughs is the fort scene, but even then, I think the only kind of punchline is when Bonnie falls over and gives a thumbs up. This scene gets a lot of hate, with a lot of people saying that it was cringy and stupid, and others defending it by saying the animatronics are just kids, and this scene shows that. For what it's worth, if Emma Tommy embraced camp throughout the movie, something like this could have worked. As it stands, it definitely feels out of place and like the time could have been better spent elsewhere. Part 6. The drama is bad. Okay, sure, it's not really a campy, silly comedy. Like I said, Emma Tommy wanted to take a more grounded, human approach to this story. The selling point is the spooky animatronics, but this movie is really a story about characters and their relationships with one another. And can I really complain about that? One of my favorite directors is Mike Flanagan, who specializes in this character and relationship focused approach to storytelling. If this is true, then let's evaluate the characters and relationships. There are three main relationships that the movie is most interested in exploring, all centering around our protagonist, Mike. There's Mike and Garrett, Mike and Vanessa, and especially Mike and Abby. Let's handle one quickly. Mike and his kidnapped brother Garrett. Sadly, this movie doesn't give us anything meaningful about Garrett or tell us much of anything about their relationship as brothers. Although we go to Nebraska half a dozen times, none of that time is spent exploring what they were like together. I guess you can see that Mike really cares and he's generally traumatized about the incident, but it has no depth. Garrett isn't much more than a plot device with a name. Let's move on to Mike's relationship with Vanessa. I think that Elizabeth Lail is actually the strongest actor in the movie, besides Doug, of course. She's able to express emotions through her tone and facial expressions in a way that keeps it grounded while also being compelling. Unfortunately, she's probably given the worst script out of the important characters, with truly horrendous dialogue and a confusingly structured character. Vanessa and Mike talk a lot throughout the movie, but if you were to ask me what their relationship was, I wouldn't have a clear answer. She gives him information and is kind of concerned about him while also kind of planning to kill him because of her dad, but not really. He gets mad at her because she wasn't forthright with important information. Other than that, I truly have no idea how Mike views Vanessa. They have a heart-to-heart that's one half trauma dump and one half exposition dump. But even then, I don't know why these characters are opening up to one another beside the fact that the script dictates it. I think that those two relationships being lackluster wouldn't necessarily sink this movie if the third knocks it out of the park. Mike's relationship with his little sister Abby is by far the most important of these three relationships. I think Piper Rubio plays a pretty good and charming Abby, but it's an uphill battle with the script and direction she was given, which can create some moments that feel a bit off.
I hate you. Hate you, Mike!
But the much bigger problem is that I don't feel the chemistry between Abby and Mike at all. I understand that Mike is protective of Abby, and I'm told that she looks up to him because she includes him in her drawings. But that's about it. There's not a lot of warmth in their interactions. While we see Mike stressed out about having to take care of her, we don't see moments where they have fun together, or where he indulges her silly kid antics, where they can just be siblings. The closest we get is the fort scene, but Mike didn't want to do that, and this scene is more about Abby's relationship with the animatronics than her relationship with Mike. They kind of have a nice scene at the very end. It's not even that amazing, but it's much better than anything else we see with them. Considering that this relationship is the driving force for the movie and clearly intended to be the emotional core of everything, the fact that it is so devoid of humanity and connection is disappointing, and I think it really hurts the movie. And that's just further exacerbated by all the weird ant stuff I talked about in the plot rundown. I don't know, maybe Aunt Jane would be a better guardian. And so, what are we left with? As a horror, it isn't scary, tense, or suspenseful. As a mystery, it doesn't have clues, intrigue, or puzzles. As a comedy, it doesn't have vibrancy, wit, or humor. And as a drama, it doesn't build interesting characters or strong, meaningful relationships. So, all we're left with is Sleepy Nebraska and a Vicious Cupcake. Part 7. What went wrong? I want to emphasize this movie could have been better. It could have been good. But I think there are overarching structural problems that led to the mess we ended up getting. And the natural question is, why did this turn out this way? How did this happen? What went wrong? One major factor that needs to be considered is that this movie was in development hell for 8 years. In an interview with Seth Meyers, Jason Blum said,
"We went through 8 directors and 15 scripts.
This might be some good old talk show hyperbole, but given the fact that Scott Cawthon himself has posted about many scrapped scripts, including one about teenage ghost hunters and another where plushies took Manhattan, I'm inclined to think that this is at least fairly accurate. Hilariously, in 2017, Blum was pretty confident in the progress they were making on the movie and stated,
"But I think Scott has a very clear idea of what he wants the movie to be."
So that was a fucking lie. But if you take any product and put it in limbo for 8 long years, it's going to have a major impact on the final product. First, it divides your audience. Now you have to make something for the original fans, who are now likely adults, many newer fans, which are young teens, and a general audience that you're hoping to capture. You're also under greater scrutiny. Many people either feel that it needs to live up to the years of hype, or else they'll think that after such a messy process, failure is inevitable. Finally, when going through such a long process with so many people getting involved, so many ideas created, reshaped, scrapped, revised, and grafted onto each other, then of course you are going to get a less cohesive end product. It makes perfect sense that I feel like the movie and the script are inconsistent and muddled. How could they not be after that? One of the consequences of this complicated production process can also help to explain the finished product. If we take a look at the director that ended up running the project, Emma Tommy, we can quickly see that she doesn't have a lot of directorial credits under her belt for feature films. There is the unremarkably decent The Wind and the absolutely horrible Blood Moon, which was a part of Hulu's Into the Dark series. Honestly, Blood Moon makes me question the title of this video, but I gotta feed the algorithm some clicks, so I'm not gonna change it. Meanwhile, the script was first written by Scott Cawthon, who clearly had a rough time working on his first feature script, considering how many iterations he went through. Once they finally nailed down the script they ended up going with, it was rewritten and revised by Emma Tommy and Seth Cuddeback. For Emma Tommy, it's her first writing credit for any project, and for Seth Cuddeback, this man is an enigma. I tried to look into him, and there's just not a lot there. He doesn't seem to have much experience writing projects like this, but he did co-write and co-direct a short film in 2009 about a man who was having an affair with kelp. Honestly, no critiques. I love some weird cinema, and it was actually pretty good. Nonetheless, a picture quickly emerges of an inexperienced group of people gathered together to make the script and direct the movie, which are where a lot of my major critiques are centered. I want to be clear, I'm not against hiring less experienced creatives on big productions. By allowing new and fresh voices opportunities in the industry, it allows for a greater degree of freedom, innovation, and fresh interpretations. There are plenty of examples of this working tremendously well, and without a larger sample size, it's difficult to say with a high degree of confidence that this person or that fucked everything up. Nor is that really my goal. I'm simply positing it as another possible factor, one of many, that may have contributed to this mess. Besides, there's another major influence on the movie that can't use inexperience as an excuse, and which we have ample evidence to make some more certain statements about, and that is the production company Blumhouse Studio. Blumhouse has produced some very good stuff, but any horror aficionado will tell you that they have a shotgun approach to producing movies. If they throw enough low-budget horror movies at the general public, they only need a few big hits to make out like bandits. This method of producing can still result in some great movies, just look at Get Out or Halloween 2018, but creating amazing movies with high quality and artistic merit isn't the goal here. The goal is to make money, and if they create something good, then that's a happy little accident. Right now they're on a bit of a safe, cheap PG-13 horror binge. And if we look at the 2 movies they've released this year following Five Nights at Freddy's, yikes! Night Swim and Imaginary fall into a lot of the same trappings that I'm talking about in this video. Blumhouse is truly on an all-star run of bad horror right now. But young kids are a less discerning, very lucrative demographic, so fuck me, I guess. And yet, I don't think we've touched on what to me is the biggest reason the FNaF movie was so bad. I think that even with all these other factors contributing to a messy, amateurish, child-friendly, and sanitized product, we could still get something good or at least enjoyable if it just embraced the best parts of Five Nights at Freddy's. I mentioned early on in this video that there's a lot to like about the franchise and the concept. It does have a certain kind of magic to it, but the direction and structure of the film don't embrace the nostalgia or the uncanny horror or the setting. I mean, most of the movie doesn't even take place in the pizzeria. The best we get on this front is seeing the animatronics made by the Jim Henson Company, which is cool, but for me, isn't enough. I can think of so many directions they could have taken this premise that, in my opinion, would have been far more interesting. I mean, plenty of people have tried it. Look at some genuinely impressive fan films that, for what it's worth, I genuinely think are better than the official product. There's going to be links in the description for those. And on my Patreon, I have a video on there where I go through 6 different directions they could have gone, each unique and each that would have been better, at least in my opinion. Obviously, these are my biases, and I recognize it's easier to come up with a handful of ideas than to make an entire movie. But I think they're interesting ideas that improve on the structural problems of what we ended up getting. Part 8. Why none of this matters. I can stand on my soapbox and wax lyrical about my complaints about the movie, but in the end, I don't think that really matters that much. I don't think it was a good adaptation, but the fans overall did like it. At the risk of dismissing or minimizing people's opinions and thoughts towards the movie, which is not at all my intent, I think that a FNaF movie was going to be a success regardless. And Jason Blum is a smart enough guy that he probably knew that. The fans wanted to see real versions of these iconic characters legitimized by being a proper theatrical movie with recognizable actors and Henson-made animatronics. That's a cool feeling, regardless of basically anything else, and I get that. The Blum ideology succeeds in making products for mass consumption, and although I want art and good stories and compelling characters and beautiful, unique visuals, all of that is hard and expensive. If it happens, great, but that's not what it's about. Five Nights at Freddy's made an absolutely insane amount of money. It was the best theatrical opening Blumhouse has ever had and surpassed all other horror movies in the box office last year. And the sequels will similarly perform astoundingly well. I do appreciate horror being distributed and shown beyond just the horror crowd. And I'm glad that so many kids are getting interested in horror and that this can be a gateway for them. But that doesn't stop me from thinking that this movie is terrible. And it doesn't stop me from being kind of disappointed that that doesn't matter.